In this video, I'm going to walk you through how to calculate variance. And this is what I would call variance the long way. Now, for now, it's just variance, but you'll understand when I show you the short way why we call this the long way. All right, so let's assume that we've got some people's scores on something. At this point, it really doesn't matter what the scores are. Let's just assume, I don't know, we asked them how many items they could remember. And we've got 5 people that participated, and their scores, remember a score is notated by the letter Y. Their scores are 7, 6, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do here is we are going to summarize this column. And basically, anytime moving forward in this class that you see a column of data, you are going to summarize it. You're going to summarize it by getting the sum, you're going to get the n, and you are going to get the mean. And remember, from our notation video, the mean is y bar. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is get the sum. So we're going to add up all those numbers, and the sum of those numbers, I believe, is 25. N is the number of subjects. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 subjects, so our N is 5. And our Y bar, again, which is our mean, is 25 divided by 5, which is 5. All right, what we are going to do now is we are going to take this mean and we are going to transfer it into this column, because this column is labeled Y bar, which, remember, Y bar is the mean. So we're going to take this mean and we're going to write it next to each one of these scores. So we're going to take this 5 and we're going to write it next to each one of those 5 scores. All right, now we don't need to do any summarization down here. All we're doing is moving the mean over. All right, in our third column, we are going to take each score and subtract the mean. This column, if we think about what this column is called, we call this column the deviations. All right, so for each one of these 5 scores, we are going to take the score and we are going to subtract the mean. Okay, so for this first one, 7 minus 5 equals 2. For this next one, 6 minus 5 equals 1. 3 minus 5 is negative 2. 4 minus 5 is negative 1. And 5 minus 5 is 0. All right, so nothing magical there. All we did was we took each one of these scores and subtracted the mean. Now what we're going to do is we are going to add up all 5 of those scores, of those deviations. So 2 plus 1 minus 2 minus 1 plus 0 is 0. And the sum of the deviations should always be 0. So this is a good check. And as we move through the analysis this semester, there are often opportunities for you to check your work to see if your numbers make sense. And this is the first check. You're definitely going to want to check and make sure that your deviations add up to 0, because if they don't, you did something wrong. You either did something wrong here or you calculated the mean incorrectly. The only time it's not going to add up to 0 is if you had to round the mean and chop off decimals. So if the mean was like 5.666666 and you had to chop off the last couple of decimals, you might end up with a situation where, because you rounded this, this is rounded and your sum might be slightly off from 0. But by slightly off, what I mean is it's going to be like 0.02. or negative 0.01. So it's very close to 0. But really, mathematically, if we don't round, the deviations will always add to 0. All right, the last thing we're going to do here is we've got one more column, and this column is y minus y bar squared. Basically, what we're doing is we are squaring these deviations. All right, so we're going to square each one of the numbers we calculated in this third column. All right, so 2 squared is 4. 1 squared is 1. Anybody know what negative 2 squared is? It is positive 4. Remember, any number squared is a positive number. So it doesn't matter if you have a negative number in this column, you're going to have lots of negative numbers in this column. There should be no negative numbers in the squared deviation column. Every number squared is positive. All right, so negative 1 squared is also positive 1, and 0 squared is 0. So we're going to add up the squared deviations. So 4 plus 1 plus 4 plus 1 plus 0, that equals 10. And that number, the sum of the squared deviations, has a very specific name. We call this our sum of squares, which we sometimes notate SS. All right, so essentially the first step in calculating variance the long way is we're going to populate this table. So once you have your scores, you're going to calculate the mean, transfer the mean into this column. For each row in the column, you're going to take the score and subtract the respective mean. So 7 minus 5, 6 minus 5, and so on. Add those up. It should add to 0. The last column, you're going to square the deviations from this column. So anything you calculated in here, you're going to square over here. Remember, they should all be positive. You're going to add them up, and this sum here has a special name. It's called the sum of squares. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to take this sum of squares and use it to calculate variance and standard deviation.